All right, I'm going to start while we're sorting out our microphones. My apologies for this less than gracious grace. Okay, we got a microphone. Welcome to our work session today for the Provo Municipal Council. It is 1:05 p.m. on October 4th, 2022. Meetings of the Municipal Council are being held in hybrid fashion. That is, members of the public can view council meetings on YouTube and Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chamber at the Provo City Center. I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast. I am George Hanley, Council Chair. I'm joined on the stand by Councilor McKay, Vice Chair, Councilor Fillmore, Councilor Shipley, Councilor Ellsworth, and Councilor Whipple. And I think we'll be joined by Councilor Oben online shortly, but I don't see him quite yet. And also by Justin Harrison, our Executive Director, and I believe we'll be joined by other staff members shortly. In the rush here, Justin, I didn't get a prayer to begin our meeting. Do you think you could do that for us? Thank you.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are all so grateful to be gathered here, to be able to discuss the affairs of the city of Provo. We ask, Father, that thy Spirit might be with us, that we may contemplate the decisions that are being made, that we may do what is best for the city and the citizens of Provo. We're thankful, Father, for this building we have to meet in. We're thankful for the service which all of our elected officials and city employees give to those who live in this city, and ask that, again, we might have thy Spirit to be with us, that we may be able to contemplate these decisions with open minds and be able to listen to members of the public. And this we ask for in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions. Unless otherwise invited by the chair, please wait to speak until called on by the council chair. It is proposed that we approve the following minutes: August 9th, 2022 work meeting and September 22nd joint meeting with the Provo School District. Are there any objections to are there any objections or requested changes? Seeing no objection, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. We'll turn to item number 1, an ordinance amending the general plan section 1.2.9 Lakeview North Neighborhood and appendix C5 Lakeview Fields SDP in the Lakeview North Neighborhood. Aaron Ardmore, planner, will be our presenter. We have 10 minutes for this.
All right, thanks. So this was at Planning Commission last week. Had a conversation with John Jensen since that, and you might see him come tonight and kind of excuse himself from this application. It sounds, I haven't got confirmation of that yet, but it might be just handled by Jay Henry, where the application was kind of brought forward by both of them, John Jensen and Jay Henry, who they own adjacent properties. If we can go on the next slide. Sorry, the map. Sorry. Thank you. So yeah, Jay Henry owns the property to the south, and John Jensen was representing the property to the north. John Jensen came into our office after Planning Commission, kind of discussed with me kind of what he was wanting to do. Didn't realize maybe the scope of what he was asking for with this general plan amendment. He was going to go back and talk to Jay Henry on where they wanted to head on this, but you might get that tonight. Other than that, it's essentially an amendment to increase the policies, the general plan policies, from a maximum of 3 units per gross acre to up to 7 units per gross acre. and that would apply to the entire west side. They were applying for this general plan change in an effort to redevelop those properties in a low density residential product with twin homes and townhomes and such. So they needed that general plan amendment to make it work. But this will be on for tonight. So if you have any questions, I can prepare for.
Any questions for Aaron? Or Ellsworth?
So it's not being continued?
As far as I know, the request hasn't come in to continue it. It sounded like John Zinson might excuse himself from it, but from his conversation with Jay Henry, that Jay would want to have this move forward
Okay.
and have a decision on it. Yeah.
Okay. So if he excused himself from it, what does that mean for the project?
It's still moving forward. So John Jensen's name is on there, but it was really an application by Jay Henry and John Jensen. Just the public notice language doesn't reflect that.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, I think, we'll return to that item tonight. We'll turn to item number 2, which is an ordinance amending the regional shopping center SC3 zone to allow animal hospital services as a permitted use. Citywide application, also presented by Ardmore.
Okay, this one's a little bit more basic. This is just adding that use you see there, animal hospital services to SC3 zone in an effort to establish a business up in the River's Edge on University, used to be called the Mix. That commercial core in the middle, they have found an opportunity to establish a pet hospital there, but it's currently not a permitted use. So they're just applying to add that to the list. Planning Commission saw this last week, didn't have any issue with it and recommended approval.
I had a question about that. I was
Yeah.
just, so do we not currently have an animal hospital in the city?
We do, but not in the SC3 zones.
Okay.
It's
Thought we
under
did, but okay.
yeah, different zoning.
Any questions about this item?
Okay.
It's like we're flying.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to item number 3, an ordinance approving a petition to vacate an undeveloped public street near the Springville boundary and approving a plat amendment and property exchange in order to facilitate the development of a new adjacent public street, presented by Dixon Holmes, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer.
Greeting, Council Chair, Vice Chair, and council members. This is an item that we brought before you in the past. We've also reviewed this with the RDA Executive Committee in the past. This is the culmination of a long string of events down at Mountain Vista in order to build a new road from Mountain Vista Parkway at the roundabout down to SR 75. As a part of doing that, we needed to consolidate 4 different UDOT access points into one public street point, and that required some negotiations and some horse trading, as it were, to exchange some access points for this, again, other. Originally, the road had been designed to go straight south, but because the property owner to the east, which actually is in Springville, needed what would be required to give up that access point, and the city would then provide access further up to the north in some of that purple area. There was also another piece that was essentially acting as a nuisance strip. So in order to combine all those and to move the road to the west, we're actually moving the road to the west, which requires that we vacate a portion of the existing street, which is really a paper street because it has not been built yet, or we're actually building it now, but it's not an existing road. That created some vacant property that would, again, act as a nuisance strip. So as a part of the trade to the property owner to the east, which is Steve Turley, acting as gateway property or gateway crossing. So we're exchanging some property there to him. He's giving up his access point. We're giving up an access point. The property owner to the west is giving up an access point, which will then allow us to have this road have access to UDOT. That also necessitates moving a boundary line, which we will hear in 2 weeks. So this is the surplusing, the vacating and disposition of property at Mountain Vista to facilitate this new road. I know that's a lot, and if I could answer any specific questions, I'd be happy to do that. But that's what we're here for as a in this work session to be heard later this evening.
Thank you. Fillmore.
So Dixon, are you asking us to do a conditional vacation of that property depending on what happens in 2 weeks?
No, we're asking you to actually go ahead and vacate it. The boundary line adjustment between Springville and Provo City, the red line is the current boundary between Provo and Springville. And a laser pointer, do you by chance? Sorry, didn't bring my personal laser pointer with me. Anyway, the new boundary will be on the edge of that purple between the two communities. And it's only going to really help people. Okay, so here's the existing boundary. And what will be considered in 2 weeks is moving the boundary right here. So this purple will effectively be in Springville in the future if the council were to approve it. But today we're only talking about vacating a portion of the street, which is this little area right here, and then surplusing this other piece right here. And so we would request that you go ahead and do that, authorize us to do that. And then we'll talk about this boundary line adjustment in 2 weeks, but just kind of holistically is.
So why not do it all at once?
Well, there was a noticing requirement on the boundary line and we had not met that. And so we are now satisfying that. And that was the 2 week, but rather than to bump the other two items, we go ahead and hear these two and then we'll hear the third one in 2 weeks.
So this is a sure thing. You're not worried about a contingency of phase 2.
Well, there is a contingency and our legal staff, Brian Jones, has put in a contingency on the boundary line agreement going forward that if it's not consummated in 1 year's time, that it would then expire. And so that would give us and Springville 1 year. But if our effort is done in 2 weeks, then we would just go to Springville and they are considering this item also.
Okay.
Can you help me remember the history of this? It seems like we've talked about this before.
We have.
Was that because the road needed a further adjustment?
So back in May, we brought this to the council because we needed to have a 90-day notice that we were considering doing an adjustment of the boundary, but there were several other pieces to it, which again included moving the road to the west and then dealing with the property that was then left in this surplus state as a potential nuisance and using that as a trade to the property owner to the east to encourage them to give up their right to UDOT so we can all have the road in the new place.
Okay. That I just needed a little refresher.
No, it's okay. It's complicated.
Yeah.
Just FYI, what is a row line?
Okay, so
Oh, it's a right of
ROW
way.
is actually an
It's a
acronym
right
for
of
right
way.
of way. Yes,
Sorry.
that's correct.
Gotcha.
All right. Any other questions for Ellsworth?
This isn't a question, but the RDA Executive Committee discussed this probably 6 months ago. And then there was another element of this that came to the council, or I'm sorry, to the board about 4 or 5 months ago. So it's a multi-phase transaction and it's the outcome would be benefit this part of the city.
Thank you.
It's amazing how many T's have to be crossed and I's need to be dotted to make that movement.
We're getting there, but thank you for your support.
Yeah.
For this.
Okay, thank you. We may be so far ahead all of a sudden. We don't have the Provo Delta people, do we? We have John Borgett here to talk about Timpanogos Golf Club. No.
I'll reach out.
Okay. Why don't we just put things on pause for 5 minutes? You guys approve of that? Okay.
Recording stopped. Hey, George,
They're just here to answer questions.
when we start the meeting again, you can just recognize Travis as having joined
Okay.
on Zoom.
And I guess if we can't get, Dixon, if we can't get John to come in, we could go to the water conservation thing, maybe? That's way in advance, but. Looks like we're ready to go. Got John is here. The man, the myth.
Recording in progress.
All right, welcome back. We will turn to item number 5. We'll revert back to item number 4 when our Provo Delta people are here. But this is a discussion regarding a proposed Timpanogos Golf Club transfer. John Borgett, Director of Administrative Services, and that's Scott Henderson, Director of Parks and Rec. But I guess, John, go ahead.
We're going to have Brett Watson, our pro at the golf course, start off.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Never mind. We're going to have Scott start us off because he brings down the house.
I'm so sorry about that. I was just
And
upstairs.
let-
And you
while
guys
you're-
are really efficient today.
Before you start, let me just mention Travis Hoban has joined us on Zoom. So
Okay, to provide a little bit of background on this request and looking at the next slide, we have to talk about the time frame when all this was happening. Other cities took a very different track with the pandemic, and it's rare that you see aspirational and pandemic in the same sentence, but I think that could be applied to what happened here in Provo City. So the other cities really, a lot of them went with complete shutdowns. So, and with those cities, that forced councils to cover lost revenues and pay expenses for a lot of their parks and recreation operations. Here at Provo Parks and Recreation, we only closed for the 6 weeks to slow the spread. And then we were able to open for safe use at all of our facilities and continue to promote safe and healthy activities in our community. Along with this, during the pandemic, we self-balanced revenues and expenses, even with the extra expenses of operating with extra sanitation and masks and additional staff and temperature taking that we had. And we were even able to balance those with the revenues that we came in. The rec center, as an example, during this time, during the pandemic, still brought in $4 million worth of revenue, which was down from the normal $5 million we budget for and it's roughly expect. But we were able to self-balance that and not have to come back for additional appropriation on those facilities. We really took a common sense approach. In our minds, in our own rationale, it did not make sense to restrict healthy activities during a pandemic that attacked those with underlying health conditions. We thought maintaining a healthy population was going to help us all deal in this pandemic together. I wrote a quote for staff early on that was posted outside, and it said, "It is less about how we handle the pandemic, but it's more about how our organization comes out of it." And that was really how we focused on our operations during this trying time. So also during this, our department started the accreditation process during the pandemic, and we were able to go through that, and we became one of 180 agencies nationwide out of 10,000 in our nation to be accredited. So we were able to talk about what our aspirations and how we were going to come out of this pandemic together. During that time, the accreditation judges saw something special both in Provo and Provo Parks and Recreation, and they nominated our department for the Gold Medal Award, the highest honor in our industry for Provo Parks and Recreation. And we were awarded that in the last national conference in Nashville. So those are exciting times. And I think what it shows is our department excelled during this pandemic time when a lot of other departments disappeared in their community. So on the next slide, let's talk specifically about the golf course during this exact same time. So these departments' efforts were relative when you're looking at the golf course, because there were also great efforts happening at the golf course to minimize the impact. We had a very unique situation in that we were fighting a fight on two fronts. We were a golf course under construction because of a decision to go to private development for 3 holes of the golf course. And then we had a pandemic piled on top of that. So neither one of those were golf course decisions, but the golf course had to deal with that. So the golf course's ability to adapt and do those things with both of these fronts was limited. I call it the $450,000 miracle, but the golf course still remained open during construction and brought in $450,000 during that year under construction and during the pandemic, and showing that our department really tried to minimize the impacts of both construction and the pandemic. Daniel Softly, our HR director, described it like golfing in Iraq, but we do appreciate our golf course community sticking with us during that time and utilizing these facilities. The council at the time, and I think Councilmember Handley was probably the only one on during that time frame, and it was discussed and contemplated that the construction on the golf course to make and mitigate for the development, it was anticipated that the golf course was going to struggle when it was under construction for revenue. So it was something contemplated both by administration and the council during that time frame. And at that time, the council, and I think it was George Stewart, expressed that, you know, we understand these impacts and we will be there, you know, when all this comes to light here. So in talking about where we are going from now, which is an amazing facility you're about ready to hear about from Brett Watson, we have really focused on environmental sustainability. It's always bears repeating that the golf course uses no culinary water for irrigation. It uses outwater, gray water from the treatment plant, and the golf course actually serves as an additional filtration for that water before it goes to the lake. The diversity of increased use is if you come out to our golf course, you see a different user of it. And if you're out in the evening or the day, you see all ages and you see the makeup of our community out at the golf course. Our golf course, with the now be included as part of the triple play membership with services there, the amount of our community utilizing our golf course is much higher than what it has ever been. We are setting records almost every single month on usage, and Brett will go over some of those numbers for us. And it really protects a beautiful open space over the top of a former landfill. And we feel, and I feel like the best way to protect open space in our community is to activate that space and make sure there is a large clientele of people that are very interested in protecting and doing that. And we have those partners with us now at the golf course. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Brett Watson to talk about Tim Golf Club now.
It's been a while since I was up here. Can we kick to the next slide, please? Okay, so how did we come out of that? That I wouldn't even say it was a mess. It was a blessing, right? Right now, the golf course is currently 100% self-sustaining. That's in all areas. In the last calendar year of golf, we did over 100,000 rounds played. That's an insane amount of rounds. Most golf courses are in the 60 to 70,000 range. Some private country clubs are 20 to 10. On this current year, we're on pace to hit $1.8 million in revenues. That covers a lot of it covers every cost that the golf course has, and then includes capital improvements to go through to sustain us for the next while. Our citywide impacts, as Scott mentioned, are incredible. Our rec center usage, our night usage. We just hosted the second annual Provo Advantage Economic Tournament, which was just awesome. We had almost every business in Provo somehow involved, and that'll be something that we're really excited to continue for the next couple of years. And then lastly is our 100th anniversary is coming up next September. So Provo City's own public golf course is the second oldest public course in the state. It's certainly the oldest in the Utah County area, and so next September will be our 100th anniversary of golf in Provo, which is pretty incredible to be where we're at now and what we've done over the past 100 years. And then this I think is a pretty good representation of where we're going, where we've been. You can see we were increasing revenue slightly in 2018 and 2019. We were heavily under construction in 2020. At the time, our contractor asked us to shut down the golf course because of COVID. And so we made the financial decision then that to keep the golf course under construction, we had to keep moving forward. And so that's why you see that dip. And then we are literally off the chart on the right side of that screen. And so that's something we're very proud of. That's something that makes Tim very different. It doesn't look as good when you move that. I'm teasing. Anyway, we're just very excited at where we're going. The golf course sustainability, as Scott mentioned, is our biggest focus with the gray water, with all of the native areas that we've put in. It's certainly taken us a long time to get the golf course where we want it to be just because we are so busy. So that's not a bad thing. But we're really excited at where it's going, and we feel like we haven't even come close to the limits. Before I turn it over to John, does anybody have any questions? That was easy.
Okay, if we could go to the next slide, please. So first thing I want to mention is that this operating transfer that's being recommended is related to 2020. It's not related to 2021 or 22. What happened for those council members that were serving in 2020, the auditors actually came in and recommended, as a result of the audit that ended on June 30th, 2020, to transfer $235,000 because they felt like fund balance was too low, and the council approved that. I would just mention that during that same time, as was mentioned by both Scott and Brett, there was construction going on. We received some funding from the medical school project to help pay for some of that construction. And so and some of those funds hadn't been spent yet. So when the auditors looked at it, they saw that we were 235 short when there actually should have been 502,000 short. And when you look at operations, is that something that they should have determined or something that we should have caught? Yes. But as we look at it now, we feel like it's important that we get the fund balance to where it's adequate so the golf course can operate. And as is mentioned right now, they are in a position where they actually are self-sustaining and the revenues have been increasing significantly. As administration, we looked at some options, and one option that we felt like would fit and might make sense would be there's a portion of fund balance in the legacy CIP, which comes from CARES Act funds that has not been allocated or spent yet. And we feel like this would be a good option for the council if they wanted to consider it, seeing how these typically are related to revenues during 2020, which was in the height of COVID, and related to the construction that was going on there. I'm happy to answer any questions from the council.
Any questions for Ellsworth?
What other funding mechanisms could be used aside from the legacy CIP funds?
The other option that I would recommend would be just from general fund balance. I think those are your two options.
I had a question. I totally understand the need for this. I don't have any argument with that. I don't have any argument with how it's been managed, et cetera. I mean, I think it's a phenomenal asset for our city. I guess I have two questions, actually. One is, if the revenues are going up as quickly as they are, is there no way to cover that gap through the revenues directly?
We've looked at it over the last couple of years, and I think one of the keys to a successful business and a successful golf course is to be investing in the course. And they are self-sustaining, but pretty much break even or slightly ahead of break even, just because of the investment that's being placed there and how they're trying to offer the services. And so I feel like this would kind of put them in a hole and could take multiple years to bring them back to balance. And so the recommendation is, let's get them on a level service, look at fund balance where it needs to be. The other thing that could happen, it hasn't happened yet, but now that construction's complete, everything's kind of settled down, the auditors could come back and recommend that we do another transfer like they did back in 2020. And so we feel like by acting proactively on our own and getting this taken care of is the best method.
Okay. My biggest reservation is, and I mean, I feel like there are just so many moving parts with government funds and projects in the city. I mean, this was my own private thought, although I think I shared it with a couple of council members, but I knew we had this money, the 365. I didn't know the exact number. I knew it was 300 something. And I'm very worried about the gap that we need to cover for the Rock Canyon Master Plan, which is about $1.6 million. And that excludes the roundabout. And we think we can ask the public to help raise some funds for that. And we were talking with Rock Canyon Preservation Alliance. They were estimating ambitiously $500,000 could probably be raised by the public. I don't feel comfortable asking the public to dig into their pockets if the city isn't going to meet them somewhere along the way. And I know that we've talked about ARPA funding as potentially covering that gap. But if that's not a possibility, then I feel like it gets hung out to dry. And I was thinking about this money for that. It doesn't get us all the way there, obviously, but it could contribute. So that's my biggest reservation is, are we sure that that money isn't going to be needed someplace else? Maybe, I mean, and I don't know if it's just semantics at this point. We say, well, which project looks like it's more deserving of CARES Act money and which one's more deserving of appropriation from the general fund? Those are tough questions. But 1.1 million is a lot to take from the general fund. And that's why I was thinking, oh, well, maybe there'd be a chance or a need to mitigate that general fund or other source that we might look to cover that gap for the master plan. And I know there's another moving part, and Public Works is here, but there, you know, that we have talked at least in theory about as some of the funding that's come to them for the aquifer project, if any of that could go to the Rock Canyon master plan. So I don't know. It's all kind of in the air for me. And I did talk briefly with Dave Shipley about it, but that's my only hesitation is that I don't want to commit to it until I have some confidence that these other gaps are also going to get covered and we know where it's all going to come from.
Yeah, and I would say if the council feels better about using fund balance and leaving those funds for this other source or other possible sources, I think that would be fine too. This is kind of a one-time event. It's not an ongoing event. The golf course is self-sustaining right now. And I think if that decision was to use fund balance and general fund rather than the legacy fund, I think that'd be fine too.
Blair Handley.
Yes, please.
It would be a stronger process if these kinds of requests came through the ARPA committee, where most of the CARES Act was pre-programmed without a council process. And then the balance of that CARES Act money was kind of left in the council's discretion. All of it should be in the council's discretion, but just that process was a little messy. So I think it would be better if we put these kinds of requests through the ARPA committee and then we could weigh them against these other priorities.
What's the timing pressures on you on the golf course? I mean, how long can we take to deliberate on this before it gets to be a problem?
Like I mentioned, there's the potential that this question may come up in the audit, you know, and if it did and the auditors recommended it, then we would have more of a, you know, tighter time frame to want to follow their request. My preference would be to resolve this now so that the auditors don't come back with this recommendation and we can look like we're prudent, taking care of our own issues. But other than that, it'd be nice to get it behind us too. But other than that, there's no real immediate time sensitive to it, other than the fact that they have a negative fund balance right now as a result of it.
Yeah. Okay. Councilor Whipple.
Just to follow up on that, when is the auditing going to be happening on this?
So right now, our independent audit we're in the middle of it. Matter of fact, just started a week ago Monday, and the auditors are coming in and examining the books and just kind of looking at things that they may recommend or may have concerns about. And 2 years ago, this came up, and that's where the $235,000 was appropriated for fiscal year 2020 as a result of it being negative. And so this could come up again in the audit. It may or may not, but it definitely could. So that's what I'm referring to.
Right. So if it does, it would be like now.
They would just say, hey, look,
Few days.
we recommend that the council consider transferring money or appropriating money to eliminate the negative fund balance. And then we would follow through and do it.
Councilor McKay.
Does that CARES fund money have to be spent by a certain date?
No, because actually what happened was we utilized public safety dollars for those CARES Act funds. And so that's the way that we reported it to the federal government. So now we've moved the money over to Legacy CIP, and they're there to use for however we wish. And I know that kind of the thoughts was to try to use it for projects that will benefit for years to come, but there's no time restriction on it.
Counselor Fillmore?
Mr. Morgan, I hope what you're hearing from us is not an unwillingness to fund this. And I think there's a consensus that this is a legitimate thing. We need to take care of it. Auditor sensitivity, whatever else. It's just a matter of what pocket we reach into. Timing on that should be. Just need your help to clarify the timing a little bit more. But I think it's worthwhile. We love what you folks have done out at the golf course. Phenomenal use of resources. Golf course is enormously from where it was before the medical school project started. So hats off to you all on that.
Thank you, Bill.
Mr. Shipley?
A minute?
Yeah.
For my curiosity and for maybe for the public's benefit, if Scott or Brett could speak to the idea of expanding use of the course, speak a little bit more to expanding, the average demographic of who's using it and widening the net for who utilizes the course. I'm really interested in that and anxious to hear what kinds of things that you guys are doing to help more people and different people utilize the course.
Well, some of the greatest strides we have is really putting golf as a mainstream activity, especially as part of the triple play with the rec center membership, where people are out there. There are free activities that you can do out there. You can putt, you can practice chipping, you get reducing with our evening activities. That has been able to provide a whole new audience out at the golf course for our evening golf on the less expensive par 3 course, and also on the driving range. So golf, like every other activity that Parks and Recreation talks about, I find it always interesting when I'm talking to people, and a lot of times it's been with the council. Well, I don't golf, and then they express opinion on a golf course. But just about every single activity I deal with in Parks and Recreation is a niche activity that the majority of the city does not do, whatever activities are. But when you start seeing 100,000 rounds and you start seeing a golf course that has gone from somewhere around $750,000 in revenue to $1.8 million in revenue upon completed project, that's just not the same people playing more. That is a whole dialed in audience that are now going out there. But the course is used for economic development tournaments. It is used for cross-country meets. It is utilized for a variety of activities, movie nights, different events that we have, with socials out in the courtyard and all. So it really has become, and we feel like we stumbled upon this in Parks and Recreation at the Peaks Ice Arena, where we diversified the programming and added indoor turf and did those things. And that's where we have found the success story in Parks and Recreation. You guys work with a lot of cities. Find me one city in the United States whose rec center is self-sufficient, whose ice arena is self-sufficient, and whose golf course is self-sufficient. You will not find one, and I think that's a big reason why we stand with a gold medal. And that's one of the unique elements. And the golf course is a big part of that story. But it's still a golf course, and a lot of its success is driven by its core activity. But $1.8 million in revenue is a lot of golfers.
Yeah, I personally, I'm anxious for the course to have low and little expense opportunities for families to try it out, right? And to have exposure to golf. And I think the course has been doing a great job with that. I appreciate you speaking to that and support, any opportunities that the course can further those types of opportunities for the city.
I mean, great amenity coming. It is taking a little while to grow in, but will be the 18-hole putting course, which will be free for every rec center member and a really low cost for every family to come out and enjoy 18 holes of, putting and learning the game. We have really focused on that. What we learned when Tiger Woods took a hiatus and golf dropped down a little bit is we learned we need to get the next generation playing. And that will be always the thing that you will find unique about our course is how many families and young kids are utilizing our course and learning a love for this lifetime sport.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're over time. So I was going to suggest maybe, especially in the interest of time and Councilor Ellsworth's suggestion, Well, first of all, I want to underscore what Councilor Fillmore said. I think we'll find funding for this one way or the other. But I think maybe it would be helpful to get a recommendation from the ARPA committee if we can at least ask that happen expeditiously, about whether or not we think we could use ARPA funds for the other issues and then use the legacy CIP funds for this, or whether we would need to go to the general fund for this and do it in other ways. But one or the other option seems to me very viable. Does that seem acceptable to the council? Is Brian here? Do I need to make a motion, or can we just, no one's opposed to that? We'll recommend that to the ARPA committee, and we'll hopefully that won't leave you hanging for too long.
That's great. Then after the committee meets, you'll decide. Sorry. Then after the committee meets and comes back with a decision or a recommendation, then it would just come back on the action agenda.
Yeah.
Plan.
Yeah.
Okay. That'd be great.
Okay, thanks. We'll be in touch on that then. All right, thank you so much for that item. We'll go to item number 4, which is a presentation regarding an update on the Provo River Delta Restoration from the Utah Reclamation, Mitigation, and Conservation Commission. This is Michael Mills, Eric McCulley, and Melissa Stamp from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Welcome. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We've been looking forward to this opportunity. We were able to present to the council a little over a year ago and provide an update of where things stood, and a lot has happened in the last, just over a year. And so, like was mentioned, I'm Michael Mills. I'm with the Mitigation Commission, and I brought with me Eric McCulley. He's one of our project coordinators that's been heavily involved in the project. And he's going to be doing the main presentation today. But we also have Melissa Stamp, who is our projects manager at the Mitigation Commission. And Melissa really took on this project early on and has been, the mind behind it. I think she wakes up every morning and the Delta's on her mind of what the next steps need to be. And so she deserves a lot of credit for where we're at, but have some information for you, and then hopefully we can answer any questions that you all might have. So we'll turn it over to Eric.
Thanks, Mike. And I appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with you all today. How many folks have actually been out to the Delta? All right, most folks. So, and I'm glad you got to go out there and check it out. It's going to be a really great space for people and the communities over time here. Again, my name is Eric McCulley, and I'm hoping to make it so only every other day Melissa has to wake up thinking about the Delta. But we're all working together, and it's a really great partnership with lots of different folks working on this together. And we've had a really good opportunity last night to go to the Lakeview Parkway ribbon cutting and look out across the Delta. And it was great to see the kids out there on their scooters and the people on their, one wheels and a bunch of bikes and things. So it's going to be a really great thing for the community. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the overall vision of the project and where we've come on the vision, and then update you a little bit on the schedule and some of the agreements and the process moving forward. And then we'll save a little bit of time at the end for some questions. And you may have seen some of this information, but I'm going to just go over the general vision. So if I could have the next slide, please. So this is the project area. And what you can see, it's about 260 acres where we're going to be diverting the majority of the Provo River into this delta. Now, this used to be part of of Utah Lake before pioneers came in, and we put a dike up, the Skipper Bay Dike, to keep Utah Lake water out of it. Now this will be part of Utah Lake again. And this shows existing recreation and some of the proposed recreation and the delta features. We're just about done with the habitat features, which are west of Lakeview Parkway. And now we're moving into some of the additional habitat east of Lakeview Parkway. And then we're going to move on to the recreation. Next slide, please. So one of the main parts of the vision here is to create nursery and rearing habitat for the June sucker, which is a threatened species. A lot of folks say, well, why are you doing this only for fish? And it's not only for fish, it's for people. as people, we've decided we don't want species to no longer exist on Earth. And that's why the Endangered Species Act was created. And the June sucker had dwindled to 200 or 300 adults in the world. And now it's over 30,000. So lots of moves have been made in order to sustain this species on Earth. And this is one of the big aspects, is finding a place for the little babies to grow into bigger fish. So creating rearing habitat for June sucker. And the Hobble Creek there on the right is a project that was kind of a preliminary project that was done to proof of concept. The fish found it. They have a way to, find the water flowing up. And so that was a success. And now we're moving to a much larger scale. So next slide, please. So this shows the different water depths that we could expect in different lake levels. So when the lake is down, like it is right now, there's going to be less water out across the delta. There's basically a sill at the downstream end where Skipper Bay Dike is that creates an elevation that, it has to fill up and then water can pour over into the lake. Now, when the lake is up, the water will actually be a foot over that sill and it will actually just be part of Utah Lake. And the lake's going to come up again, right? Maybe one of these days, but after we get some more, snowpack. But this just shows the different levels of water. So at times there'll be a series of, it's about 4 miles of river channel that have been built out there, and people will be able to get onto those channels in the dark blue. And then in low water, it'll be the channels with some shallow water in between. And then at high water, there'll be a lot more deeper water out there, and those channels will also be deeper. And so that shallow water, that's the rearing habitat we're looking for the little babies to grow into bigger fish. Next, please. So some of the recreation features that are going to be built around the delta are a paved trail on the berm to the south. There's some binoculars there that show a new trail that's going to be coming in. That's going to be developed over the next year. And then that will create a loop trail down there. There's also an equestrian trail that'll be adjacent to a paved trail, a viewing tower right where the binoculars are, where you'll be able to look out across the area and out towards Utah Lake. And then the Skipper Bay trailhead is over to the right, where you can see a little fisher person and a walker. There's going to be a boat launch there. There's going to be, central hiking locations, and then angling access to different parts of the delta. And it's going to create a really nice community gathering place and a place for people to come to and go from down along the river, the existing river channel, which is at the bottom of the map. There's going to be additional fishing access, boating access, and we're working to provide a little bit of water to that and keep the elevation at a way that so people can actually continue to boat down in there. So next. So some of the recreation features I mentioned are a viewing tower, which you'll be able to look out over the entire delta and out onto Utah Lake. That'll be at the southwest corner. There'll be on-water boating access for flat water boating, canoeing, paddle boards, and things like that. There's going to be, areas for folks to walk their dogs and areas for people to go out into the marsh and experience that. And then also other, recreation support facilities for folks. Okay, next. So the existing river is going to be, a lot of the water is going to be removed from the existing river, but we're still going to have 10 cubic feet per second, which is, it's a pretty good amount of water. 1 cubic foot or 1 cubic foot is about the size of a basketball. So, 10 basketballs a second going down, and they'll fill in the existing channel. And then we're actually going to put a small dam with an outlet in at the bottom to keep that elevation high so it doesn't completely drain the whole channel, to maintain the existing recreation opportunities down there. There'll be a flow delivery system that's going to be managed by Central Utah Water Conservancy District, an aeration system, which we're working on to deal with some of the water quality issues. And then, as I mentioned, some other recreation features. So this will still be, a water trail down there. Next, please. So the fishing platforms and non-voterized access will provide access to some of these flat water sections. There's also going to be a short section where it's going to drop down from Lakeshore Drive Trailhead to Lakeview Parkway Trail, and then it'll basically be flat water all the way out to Utah Lake State Park. There'll be a small dam in place that allows some water to go over, but it's not going to just be an open conduit to the lake. When the lake does come up, it will be lapping at that small dam as well. So next, please. So one of the big parts of the project that we're working closely with your Parks Department on is this Delta Gateway Park. And this is going to be a really amazing feature for the community. It's a natural park right close to the river. It's going to connect some of the trails there. There's going to be open areas, some irrigated turf, but a lot of kind of natural areas. We're doing this for the June Sucker, so there'll also be some interpretive features and some education. There'll be parking, restrooms, and other amenities. And like I said, a nature-themed playground that really helps kids get engaged with nature because, a lot of folks are here because of the easy access to nature, and that's going to be a big theme here. So we've been working closely on this. To date, a lot of fill has gone into this area to kind of bring the elevation up to where it needs to be to do the park. We're going to be working with Parks Department to get a bid out next year, get a contractor on board. And this is slated for about, later in 23, potentially finishing up around early 24 or sometime in 24. So next, please. So, a lot of people question, well, why do we want to build a delta? And I mentioned this a little bit. What we found is that the little baby fish get eaten by bigger fish, and they also get washed into fields or washed out to Utah Lake. And there's nowhere for these really small fish to grow into fish that are big enough to swim away from predators. So larval transport and survival and that recruitment of the babies into big fish was found to be one of the significant impacts on this species. So the purposes are to implement the recovery plan for June Sucker and also provide compatible recreation improvements. We don't want to just set everything aside for the fish or for nature, but we want to have a compatible area where people can benefit and also the fish as well. And there's also a, management of the flow regime in order to provide water for the fish. And that's another part of the project that's been worked on. And the key aspect is this has been a multi-agency effort, and it's taken a lot of different partners over many, many years to get to this point. And all the people, over the last 10 years, I'm just lucky I get to kind of help pull it all together here at the end. So it's been a really big partnership and effort. So next, please. So this is connected to our water supply. I think you all are aware, we do bring some water over from the Colorado River. The Bureau of Reclamation has also built the dams, the Deer Creek and the Jordanelle Reservoir. Our agency built the Middle Provo River Restoration between Jordanelle and Deer Creek. So that's one of the projects that we've done. And we were set up to basically help mitigate for the damage to the environment for building of all the dams and bringing the water over. And so we're part of the Central Utah Water Project as, bringing water to the people, but then also making a balance with species and ecosystems. So that's why we're doing this, why we're building the Delta. So next. This is a brief construction schedule, and it kind of shows really the work started in about June of 2020. So, pandemic or not, getting out there and got the Bureau of Reclamation crews working to remove the Skipper Bay Dike, excavate the Delta ponds and the river channel. And the Skipper Bay Dike was just finished about a month ago. lowering down to, provide access for the lake to come up into the area. We're working towards the end of 22 into early 23 on diverting the river. And then we're going to do all the work on the existing river channel, aeration system, and the small dam over in 2023. And then 2024, we're looking at a lot of the recreation features kind of coming together and being finalized. What you can see have spanned the entire program has been bird monitoring, working closely with the airport to reduce the potential for wildlife hazard from birds, pelicans and things like that, and planes. Invasive species control in the area, and then also mosquito control. We've been working closely with them. Of course, outreach, public involvement, and coordination have been really key aspects of this. We're out on the trails all the time. Not sure if folks heard, but we just closed a portion of the trail, and we're still working on, getting people around there. And we're actually out there on the trail talking to people, helping them figure out which way to go, watching them go wherever they want to go half the time. But we're trying to do our best to just let them know what's coming in the future. The administration and the operations agreements are a significant effort that's going on right now. And it shows the Provo City Lakeview Parkway construction basically done. They're just tying up some things right now, but that was closely coordinated. We actually just provided topsoil for, almost the entire construction area. We're working together closely on the seeding and the planting, and we're all kind of working in the same area right now. So we coordinate closely with the construction folks out there in Provo. So that's the construction schedule. Does anyone have any questions on the schedule or anything I've covered so far?
Mr. Fillmore?
Yeah, I was glad to hear you mention the continuing concern with respect to the airport. How confident are you that we haven't created a greater hazard for bird impact on air flights?
Well, that's been analyzed closely, and a lot of data is being collected on that. The airport's right beside a big lake with a bunch of wetlands around it. I mean, there's already a ton of birds down there. And we are working closely with wildlife services folks. We actually hired a person that works at the airport that goes out and does bird surveys across the area to look at where the birds are using. We actually changed some of the design aspects to make it less likely for bigger birds like pelicans and Canada geese to land in these areas. They like big, long expanses, which the lake provides plenty of places they can come in. And there's already a lot of places around the airport that the birds are. What we did is we changed our design so it has steeper banks and it's less likely to attract those larger birds. I mean, there's certainly going to be birds out there, but it's really, in the whole scheme of things, if you look around the airport, it's not going to be that much different. Our focus is not to create places for Canada geese and pelicans. So we are confident that we can manage that. And one of the things we're going to be doing in the next couple of years is watching how it grows, seeing if there's wildlife mitigation that's needed and other things like that. And did you have a comment on that?
Just to add, we've been able to work with DWR, Wildlife Services, airport staff to put together a group where it kind of has a weird name, agency representative group, but they're meeting monthly, discussing bird issues down at the airport. We've really put together kind of an action team that if we identify problems, that these people are on the ground and ready to go to try to address any impacts that do develop on top of all the efforts that Eric mentioned.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So if I'm hearing you right, sounds like you feel fairly confident that with your design elements, there shouldn't be a net increase of large birds flying in the flight patterns.
Yep.
And
That's
you,
right.
of course, monitor that for the future, but sounds like you're fairly confident.
Yeah, we're confident in that. And we also have contingency in place where people are paid to go out and look for birds, see if the bird patterns change. And then there are certain tools that, all airports have in order to, you can haze the birds, you can do other things like that. You can, there's all kinds of things airports do. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of airports right beside oceans and lakes. And, because it makes a nice flight path. I don't think they considered that birds are all there all the time too. So,
I mean, the genesis of the concern, of course, is that the Delta will attract more fowls, more birds into the area, right?
yeah.
So it's a matter of trying to divert them to the right areas and keep them out of the flight paths. The other question I wanted to ask you had to do with mosquitoes. How confident are you that we can do a massive mosquito abatement program so it's a pleasure and not a pain to walk those paths?
Yeah, well, so mosquitoes are a natural part of the environment, and there were mosquitoes there before.
Yeah.
This area, even though it has been drained for agriculture, there's been sitting water out there for, forever, basically, and there are mosquitoes. We're working closely with mosquito abatement to go in and mitigate where mosquitoes are. And then we will have water flowing into the Delta and flowing through the channels that should help having moving water. There's going to be mosquitoes, but according to, the planning, we don't think it's going to be, exponentially more. It's completely dry right now, and you go down there and there's bugs. There's mosquitoes. So it's also part of the commitment is that we'll work closely with mosquito abatement and make sure that it's at an acceptable level.
So the major problem is standing water, right? So
Yeah.
If you can minimize that and do a massive spraying, you trim it down to acceptable levels. Right?
Yeah. It's all part of managing natural systems around urban areas. And we're working closely with the Division of Wildlife Resources on that, who have worked on a bunch of other projects as well. So,
Okay, thanks very much.
yeah, thank you. Any other questions on the schedule?
I had a question, but first a silly comment. I would like, when I'm done on the council, I'd like to volunteer to be a bird surveyor. That sounds like a great job.
Yeah, no doubt.
Sounds fun. So when the Delta diversion happens, I think I talked to Melissa about this when I took a group of students down for a tour recently, which, by the way, if the rest of the council hasn't done, I don't know if there are more tours to be had, but that was very educational and very interesting. Will there be a public ceremony? It sounds like it's going to be at a cold time of year, which is a little bit sad, but I would love to make this a nice celebration for the city. Is that something that we can coordinate with the administration and make happen?
Absolutely. And you have no idea how much time we've spent trying to figure out when the water's coming in and how we can have all the right people there at the right time. But yes, you guys are on the list, and we'll let you know.
Okay.
We're trying to figure out exactly how it's going to be. It's most likely between November and January. We're pushing later at this time just because of these things take time. And we'll definitely let you know. We are having folks come in because a lot of this is from the infrastructure funding that came from the federal government and they are interested in seeing that funding spent on the ground. So there's going to be people coming from all around, and we'll definitely let you all know.
Okay.
And there is one more second Saturday. So basically every second Saturday of the month from April through October, we've got a field trip out there. So October 8th, we'll be out there. Is it 9:00? It's at 9:00. We'll be meeting out at the Delta, be the one last one for the year. We've already got about 30 people, maybe even 50 people. So if anyone's interested, come on out. You can come and visit the Delta. We'll go out by the lake and take a look at things. And then if you want, you can stay and help us pull some weeds or maybe plant some plants or spread some seed. But that's the one more this year. And then we'll be continuing that next year. As we finish the Delta restoration project, there's still a couple years of establishment that we need to do. And really, that's when we'll engage the community in helping us make sure the plants stay alive and that, the pollinator plants are in good shape and other things like that. And then as people get out there, you know, you let the public into places and they do whatever they want to do. So helping manage that, maybe picking up garbage, you know, dealing with waste issues and things like that, those will be part of the next year. And so we will continue that. Something next year will be available.
Will recognition of the landowners who have given land to this project be part of that?
We're
Celebration.
working with the landowners to determine how they want to be recognized.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think it's
We
a
want to give
great
them
thing.
whatever they want. I mean, maybe they want, maybe they don't, maybe, you know, but yes, we're working with them to give them what they want for recognition. So any other schedule questions? And I've got a couple more slides just to show folks. So maybe if we could go to the next slide. Right now we do have a trail closure. It's between Lakeshore Bridge Trailhead and Lakeview Parkway because we're diverting the river. We're waiting to unleash this map. We're going to have, this is going to be available on our website. We've got a mobile website and a QR code where people can go around 620 North or down to Center Street to get around this because, you know, a ton of people use this trail. And we're just waiting for Lakeview Parkway to open fully to the public before we, you know, really send this map out. But we do have a different map that basically just shows some of the closed areas. And so I don't know if you've heard about it in the news or if anyone has commented, but if they do, they can call me. So I'm the customer service representative on any calls. So, and we're out there dealing with the trail closure and we'll have a detour pretty soon. Next slide, please. I'll go through this pretty quickly. The stakeholder outreach and coordination. Next. There's been a ton of coordination from the Lakeview Parkway to the sports park where we provided fill and material, Delta Gateway Park, airport hazard mitigation like we discussed. We're getting ready to jump into a recreation work group to engage participation. So if folks are interested in some of the finer details of the recreation, we're going to be talking with you and with others on that. And then we also have stewardship activities with the Provo High School environmental science classes. They come out quarterly. We've got UVU students that come out. We've got BYU students and lots of people getting engaged. I will let you know, we've got 2 internships we're going to have this coming year. AmeriCorps internships, 450 hours. Had a great gal, Haley, this year. She did a 450-hour internship. Got a lot of great professional experience. I have 2 of those next year. If any of, you know, students or kids or anything want to come and talk to us. So next, please. Again, we've had tons of different outreach opportunities. We've got our website. We're going to have a newsletter this fall. We've been working with the Utah Lake Commission, which is now the Utah Lake Authority. Get the 4th graders out talking about this, Provo High School, and then the final second Saturday tour on October 8th. So next. So multiple objectives of different partners are have gone into this, and the Provo City Vision 2030 was the main one for Provo, and I won't get into the details on this. So this is what we're working on right now. Mike and Melissa, mostly Mike is working on some of the final land transactions, easements, and things like that. So next. So the lands in the vicinity of the Delta Bridge and under Lakeview Parkway, some of those transfers have been made. We've donated land to Provo City for the Delta Gateway Park. We're finalizing the agreements on the diversion structure, which will be in the river, and the channel downsizing, and then perpetual easements for Provo City on the operations and management of the diversion, where our crews or Central Utah Water Conservancy District crews will be managing that. And then access to the Delta from Lakeview Parkway. We're also working with the airport and mosquito abatement and all these other groups. So the boundary line agreements in progress are just adjusting some boundary lines along the ditches and then just kind of pairing up some of the lines. If anyone's ever tried to buy or purchase property in the county, sometimes the lines don't exactly line up. And working through the details on that. And then also providing some different license agreements for management of the stormwater facilities, and you guys having access out there. Next. So this just kind of has some of those ideas in line. You can see the boundary lines at the top, the Gateway Park, construction diversions, and the areas around Lakeview Parkway are complete. We're still working on a construction easement down at the small dam. So next. And that's about all I have today. You can visit our website, provorriverdelta.us. You can sign up to receive our newsletters. And if you want us to present again at any smaller groups, I can present, or Melissa, or get out there. If people want to walk the trail, if you all want to come out on a tour, let us know. And if you want to know more about the June Sucker Recovery Program, we can provide that information as well. Got a picture from out on the Delta. The monarch butterflies like it. And so it's going to be a really great place, both for pollinators and for people and for fish. So Melissa, did you want to say a couple things?
Item to mention, and really appreciate everyone's time today. I did want to just touch on those last slides that Eric showed regarding land transactions. You may recall that when I presented to you guys a little over a year ago, we were just gearing up to do the land transactions around New Lakeview Parkway, and it requires a council action to put that property on a surplus list to make that transfer possible. So we do anticipate that action will be coming up before you in the next couple months for just that sliver that we're kind of swapping. The boundary doesn't quite follow the west bank of an existing ditch that the city wants to maintain access to for maintaining their storm drainage system. So there will probably be like I said, kind of just a sliver that may come up on your future council actions as a requirement. So just so you know.
Thank you. I think that's it, unless anyone has any other questions.
Well, I would just thank you all for all this incredible work. I know, having looked into this for some time, I know how much coordination it takes between a lot of different agencies, all of whom have different sets of interests and sometimes competing interests. And so I know that this takes a lot of work and a lot of effort across all of those interests. Having enjoyed the river restoration in Heber Valley for many years now, if anyone's familiar with that, I think that has become a gem of that whole valley, and it really has brought back a lot of wildlife, a lot of birds, a lot of fishing, and it's a real asset to that valley. And I think this is going to have a similar kind of impact for our community. So we're standing to benefit greatly from many years of work by a lot of people. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate your participation and your attention today. Thanks.
Thanks so much. All right. We are at the point where we can take a break. We'll come back at 2:35. Is that all right?
Recording stopped.
I didn't mention Wayne and Brian are here, but sorry. I'll try to get that in. Thank you. Ready to start? I know the ice cream's not helping.
Recording in progress.
All right, welcome back, everybody, from our break. We will resume our agenda, starting with item number 6, a discussion and update from the Natural Resources Committee regarding water conservation. We have 35 minutes for this item. I'll just start by explaining to the rest of the council kind of what we've been talking about on the Natural Resources Committee regarding water conservation, and then Malia's going to present some information. We are not asking for any action to be taken at this time. We just wanted to make sure you were aware of our conversations and would welcome any thoughts and feedback you have about some of our deliberations. But essentially, we've had some presentations about different water conservation ideas for cities. And we listened to feedback from Public Works and from Parks and or from Development Services about these ideas. But then we got an opportunity to attend a conference that's happening next month. Is that correct? And part of the award of getting accepted to this conference is that this water conservation organization, which I don't know the name of, but others can explain this, are going to give us an audit of our code. So we were moving, as we were discussing different water conservation ideas, especially from the Water Conservancy District, we thought we would start examining how our code compared to some of their recommendations to see where any differences might be and whether or not we wanted to make those changes. And then when we came upon this opportunity, we thought we would put a pause on that and invite this external audit of our code that then we could use as our guideline for making final decisions. So that's kind of where we're at. Malia, do you want to go ahead then? And we have Public Works here and our folks from planning as well. If we have any questions for them, they're happy to answer any questions.
See if this works. It does. Okay, so George kind of gave a basic overview of what we have been working on since I took over this committee, so earlier this summer. So first, I'll kind of go over that middle section there is reviewing Provo Land Use Code. So as a committee, we realized as far as water conservation, we wanted to take legislative and also budgetary measures. And so one of those was this idea of looking at our code and seeing if there's any way that we can improve water-wise policy. So the conference that George mentioned is put on by a nonprofit called Western Resource Advocates, and the conference is called Growing Water Smart Workshop. And it's funded through the state, and Hannah, our sustainability coordinator for the city, applied for that, and Provo was accepted. So we have a delegation going, including planning staff, some members from Public Works, a council member, Shannon, Councilor Ellsworth, is going to that. And that is November. And part of that, attending that workshop, we get 100 hours donated for this nonprofit to do a code audit for us, and then come with some recommendations about water-wise policies. And so if you have any more questions regarding that, once we've gone through everything, I'm sure Hannah can provide a lot more information than I can. I'll go back up to that first section, which is reviewing the water conservation standards. So we are a member of Central Utah Water Conservancy District, and there's other districts around the state, Jordan, the Jordan Water District, which is north of us, Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. That's the one north of us. So we're reviewing those standards, specifically Central Utah's We reviewed those standards as a committee, but then also we invited in two separate meetings, both Public Works. We invited Dave Decker and then Gary Calder and David Day to come and talk to us about their views on that and what the city is currently doing with water conservation efforts. And then we also had community development come and talk to us as far as both public and private kind of efforts that we could take to improve water conservation. So that leads into that final section there, which is water conservation's both legislative and budgetary. So this is where the committee's going next, is we're coming here today to kind of give an update, kind of get some questions answered if any council members have them, but then also get your input as we go forward and really have some legislative and possibly budgetary recommendations for the council to take action on in the future. So one is the public education of Provo residents. That's a big thing that is a big priority for the committee. And I know that Hannah and the mayor's office and Public Works are all coordinating on doing some public education. And I don't want to speak to that because I don't want to say anything wrong or misleading. So again, Hannah's here and so is Public Works. They can answer some questions on efforts that they're doing. So we want to coordinate with them on that, but we also kind of have some goals as far as education about what private citizens can do in their home, but also on the outside, so in and outside their home for water conservation. Along with that is technology updates, so smart meters, smart appliances, updating appliances, and further education. One topic that I'm actually researching right now for the committee is the idea of flipping strips. So turf reduction on city parcels specifically is what I'm looking into, and Hannah is helping me with that. We're looking over city parcels where there's some grass. So for example, out here on Center Street, you can actually look out the window and see it. But in Center Street, just that strip of median, that is grass. So kind of grass like that, looking at that, seeing as how much acreage there really is around the city and what that would take to flip, what we would put in place, what that would cost to upkeep. Anyway, just going deep into that. So that's something that the committee is looking into. And we talked with development services when they came about standards for new development, and also then encourage or incentivize programs for existing homes, what is already out there. There's a lot of resources, both included the public can see those resources. They're published with the agendas, then also in SharePoint for the counselors, different rebate programs, incentive programs, both state and federally, that people can do both inside and outside their home for water conservation. So that's kind of a general overview of committee updates. I don't know if any other committee members, Councilor Fillmore, Councilor Ellsworth, if you would like to add to that. And then, like I said, development services and Public Works are also here to help answer questions.
Thanks, Malia. Any comments from committee members? Mr. Fillmore? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
No, I think we're all in favor of conserving water where we can, where it makes sense. We talked somewhat in our last Natural Resources Committee about trying to get some cost benefit analysis. How much cost, how much is the benefit in terms of water savings? So that's part of your ongoing efforts, you, Hannah, whoever else is involved. That's absolutely critical before we get any decisions. Second thing is Provo has a fairly unique water resources base and ASR and the other things we're doing. Just want to make sure that whatever we end up recommending is customized to Provo's unique circumstances and augments the good efforts of Public Works as opposed to contradicting it.
Yeah, I'll just say that the committee has been working really just organizing solutions, not even recommending solutions at this point, but there's some solutions that are legislative that wouldn't cost the city any money. There are other solutions that would be policy decisions that eventually would cost the city money. There's other recommendations that would be focused on education and citizen communication, and that would cost a little bit of money, but they would be administrative, not legislative. And so there's just different buckets and different ideas, and nothing has really been formalized to propose to the council right now. We're just looking at right sizing things for Provo and making sure that they're adaptable and adoptable here. And the state is in a state of drought. I think that's obvious. We're not looking to be gluttonous with our water consumption, nor are we looking to be as kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, something like what's Southern Nevada's style, right? So there's something in the middle, something that's adaptable to Provo that we can work on together, and that's where the committee's headed.
So any questions from the rest of the council to the committee, to the staff? Any insights or thoughts you have about this that could be helpful to us? Councilor Whipple?
So one thing that I would like to have considered when we're looking at particularly park strips and flipping the turf on those is walkability on those areas, because we can walk on grassy things relatively safely, but something like the big cobbles that are by the rec center between the parking lot, like that little island of cobbles, those are ankle turners, right? And so where we've got areas that are, basically islands in the middle of streets, or where people are definitely going to be walking there, I want them to be walkable things. Even though they're part of the landscape, they have to be functional for their uses. So it's a weird thing to consider, but I do want it considered, having turned my ankle a couple of times.
Good point. Any other questions? Can we assume that you're comfortable with the direction we're taking? Obviously, you'll have questions and things you want to look at specifically when we get to that. Go ahead, Councilor McKay.
And I don't see that you're talking that specifically right now. So, I'm not interested in like doing punitive things or that along this routes. But it's for what you're telling us. You still haven't, there's nothing specific that we're really.
Yeah, we haven't contemplated anything punitive nor mandates. I suppose a code change could be described as a kind of mandate that says all new developments going forward must meet these landscape requirements. So those are going to be the things that we're going to want to look closely at to make sure that those are suitable for our city, they're manageable, that they're going to result in good both good water conservation and good aesthetics. And the Central Utah Water Conservancy District recommendations were provided to you. We also gave you some examples from other cities, Mapleton and Jordan, I think. So, if you look through those, or as you think about those things going forward, if you have any specific either concerns or recommendations from what you saw there. But that's the general spirit of what we're considering. Maybe sort of in line with what Mr. Fillmore said. From my perspective, I see this as just I'm looking for a healthy complement to the very good work we're doing to ensure water supply and to improve water supply. Just to make sure that if public education of Provo residents does a tremendous amount of good, and that gets us most of the way there, but there are a few things that we can do to increase or improve our water conservation through legislative action, then that's what we'd also like to consider with the council. So that's kind of the gist of what our conversations have been and where we're headed.
There were definitely a couple specifics in the examples you gave us that I question, but I guess we have to wait for specifics to.
Well, if you want to share that, any concerns you had with the committee, that's just helpful for us in terms of deliberation, obviously. But we'll have the chance to make those deliberations. I mean, we had gotten to the point where we were about ready to look at our code in comparison to the recommendations that had been made and have our staff do that work. And then when we had this opportunity to have this code audit, we thought, okay, we can, we're heading into winter seasons, hate to say that on a beautiful day like this, but every October I realize this does not last much longer. So eventually, we're going to go into a different season, and we've got some time to kind of maybe get ready for the spring, right? And so we thought it wouldn't be a bad idea to take a bit of a pause, learn what we can from this opportunity, and then come back and make some recommendations to you. So, okay. Anything else? All right, we'll move on then to item number 7, which is wow, we're just moving along so quickly today. Presentation regarding towing ordinances, Brian Jones and Mark. AO, I know you told me, and I had like a little mnemonic device to remember how to say AO, not IO. AO, but I can't remember my mnemonic device, so I've got to come up with a mnemonic device to remember my mnemonic device. Does that make sense? My apologies. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, while Malia's prepping that, aloha, aloha, just to be different. Aloha to the council, to the administration. For our presentation today, it's about towing ordinances and delivery service vehicles. This is a concern after some report of occasional predatory towing happening. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I have this. Okay, so here's what we did. So what we did is we look at several cities in Utah to identify ordinances in their city code that protect delivery vehicles against some abusive towing companies. So our goal is to identify ordinances that we could potentially apply or could use as a pattern for future regulations for Provo. Just a brief review of what we have so far. So when I was reading our city code, there's a lot of information in there. Reminds me a lot of grad school. So what I did is I tried to categorize them into 3 main categories. The 3 O's of our towing ordinances in the Provo City Code. Our first category, it has a lot of regulations that relates to the owner of the property. So we have like ordinances that says they need to have towing must be authorized by the owner of the private property, which vehicle is located. They must have a request and some regulations for patrol towing. The next O is operation. Of course, how they are doing the towing. They need to have the business license, the proper documentation, the reporting. And of course, if the owner arrived while they are towing, so those regulations there. And the next, this is something that will be discussed by Mr. Brian Jones. We have some regulations about towing that relates to signages and what the towing operator must wear. These are like all very helpful for delivery vehicles and just for Provo citizens to know about towing. So this is what we have so far, and but we don't have anything specific about delivery vehicles. So we looked at different cities. We look at the cities mainly because their population is close to what we have in Provo, and also because they have a university. We're trying to look for cities to have this apple-to-apple comparison as close as possible. Looked at Orem City Code, West Jordan, South Salt Lake, Sandy, Logan, West Valley, and Ogden. For most of the cities, they have the similar 3 O's, but they don't have the delivery service vehicle regulations that we are looking for. But one of them have one, Ogden. So we found this in the Ogden City Code. I know it's too small. I'm going to zoom in later. They have this section in their city code with the title Non-Consensual Removal of Vehicle from Private Property, which is something that is similar to concerns reported. So here's what they have. They have, first thing they did is they defined what a controlled lot and what an uncontrolled lot is. According to their definition, a controlled lot, so they have regulations for a controlled lot and for an uncontrolled lot. Basically, it's just to summarize this slide, and then a controlled lot is a parking that is gated. They have man boot, they have stall marked, or they have areas that are just assigned to specific user. And of course, an uncontrolled lot is the opposite. A parking facility that is not controlled or partially controlled lot. An example given is a grocery store parking lot. So that is an uncontrolled lot. So here's what they have, is the ordinance. So they have, just to summarize this, they have a specific waiting or grace period for before a tow could happen. So for someone who is parking in a controlled lot, they were given at least 15 minutes since the vehicle is observed in violation of the private property parking regulations described in the sign required by Mr. Brian Joseph will describe more, and we'll talk more about signages later. But they were given 15 minutes if they are parking at a controlled portion, and they are given, for section 8, at least 30 minutes have passed since the vehicle is observed in violation of the private property parking regulations described as long as they meet the sign requirements. So this is our main finding. We found one in Ogden. This is something that we find helpful. I know delivery vehicles don't need 15 minutes or 30 minutes to deliver their goods, but yep, we found Ogden, and this is our main finding. Any questions or suggestions from council?
Counselor Whipple?
Yeah, so I read through this. I thought it was pretty interesting. It seems to me that the easiest solution would be to have these owners of the private lots have some spaces designated for short-term parking. And I recognized almost immediately that they can't do that because they don't have enough parking spots necessarily for all of their residents. They can't designate a space that way. So I was wondering if, barring that solution, it would make sense maybe in some cases to designate some of the on-street parking as short-term parking, because that is something within our control, so that you would have the ability for these delivery things without going through the process of changing a code or anything like that. I don't know how that idea will be received by anyone who lives adjacent to these neighborhoods, but it might be helpful if the issue is being able to come in and drop off, or having your friends pick you up or something like that. If there's no parking in the lot and there's no parking on the street, then having a high turnover zone might actually address it.
Mr. Jones, do you have an opinion about that?
Well, the one thing I was going to comment on is thoughts about introducing this. So we don't have this distinction between controlled and uncontrolled lots, but what we do have in our code is a distinction between patrol tows and request tows. And for residential lots, in order to be able to patrol tow, you actually have to meet certain requirements and have your contract signed off by the mayor's designee, who is one of our police officers in the police department. And in our code, one of the elements for qualifying for patrols is actually having a documented plan for adequate visitor parking. So one, potential solution, ignoring for a moment Councilor Whipple's comment about whether that's even possible, is to say that as these contracts are reviewed and the towing companies are reviewed for whether they qualify for the certified status of being able to do patrol tows, is that they actually be required to designate some delivery spots as part of their adequate visitor parking plan. Now, having said that, I don't know how feasible that is or whether or not, but I guess that would be their case to make, right? That'd be up to, that's something that would be within the control of the mayor and the mayor's designee in reviewing these plans. Now, I'm quite certain that most of these contracts were reviewed back when we first passed this ordinance and probably haven't been reviewed since. That may be something we need to follow up with the police department about as far as where patrol tows are allowed. As far as the other question about, I mean, the city has, as long as they are public streets, I mean, we can do what we want with the parking on the city streets. There's a lot of enforcement questions about, you know, even if we designated them short-term, could we actually, do we have the manpower to actually send the parking car around often enough for that to actually be enforceable? But it's certainly something we could do if that is the solution.
Mr. Shipley, is there anything in our code right now that gives any minutes at all to before it? I mean, a towing company can take somebody within the first few seconds of them parking in the wrong spot?
Yes, and in fact, I was going to mention this during my presentation that they actually have an incentive to do so. One of the things that, because I'm going to talk about fees, and one of the things you need to know about fees, if you didn't know already, is that there are fees that they can charge. There's a maximum fee they can charge that's set by the state. There's also a provision that says if the owner shows up before the vehicle is removed from the property, but after the vehicle is connected to the tow truck, you still have to pay 50% of the fee. If the owner shows up before the vehicle is even connected, you have to let them take the vehicle without charging them anything. So the tow companies actually have an incentive to connect the second they pull up to a vehicle. Probably even if they're not certain that a violation occurs, just because then that preserves their right to at least cover half the fee.
So when Ms. Whipple was talking about locations having adequate temporary parking or having the city have on-street, temporary parking, I'm just thinking of a lot of locations as she's saying that there's no way the city could have on-street parking anywhere near. I mean, go down 800 North and there's nowhere that the city could have on-street parking for any of those locations, any of that housing that's along there, because we don't allow parking anywhere on that street. So there wouldn't be a location, for that to happen. And I don't know that, having signage and then enforcement is even realistic for something like that. Although I think it's, that's just kind of the new age that we're in. It would have been nice to have temporary and delivery parking everywhere, obviously. But my thought is, as long as Ogden's policy doesn't create something that I can't foresee or think about, like some kind of unintended consequence, I think there should be some kind of grace for folks who are delivering, for folks who are dropping someone up, for folks who are picking someone up, to not immediately be towed the moment that they pull up. But again, I don't know enough about this to know if Ogden's having a problem with this policy or even able to enforce this policy in some way. But I think that makes sense to me, that there would be some kind of grace for some of these locations. And like I say, I don't see any other solution. I see some of these properties as not having enough parking spots like we talked about, or not having on street anywhere near, that could facilitate some other type of policy to accommodate that.
A couple comments on that really quick. I mean, the one issue, so there's a couple issues here. You'll notice that Ogden's isn't specific to delivery vehicles. It's just a grace period for all vehicles. That perhaps creates an unintended consequence where, for example, this happened to me on a regular basis at law school. I come home to my designated numbered space and somebody else is parked in it, and I have to park a block away and carry all the groceries in. And the grace period requires 30 minutes to pass before somebody even could get towed. So because again, as we've talked about before, there's a tension between the rights of the car owner and the rights of the private property owner, right? So that's one thing to consider. On the flip side of that, though, one of the things that came up in the discussions and the emails I saw about the delivery drivers, it's difficult for the tow companies in the current day and age to actually know who's a delivery driver and who isn't. If somebody has a Domino's Pizza roof topper on their car, that makes it easy. But most of our delivery drivers are DoorDash, and they don't have any markings on their car. And the tow truck driver wouldn't even know if somebody that was really there for some completely different purpose came out and said, I'm with DoorDash, the tow truck driver would have no way of knowing and wouldn't have any way of identifying the vehicle beforehand because of that. So there's some complications in trying to figure it out that way.
Can I get clarification on what your previous thought was about requiring sort of a visitor spot? I quite like that idea. I mean, it seems reasonable to say if you're going to patrol, then you should at least have some allowance for people, because any one of these apartment complexes, especially in the age of DoorDash and other kinds of things, is very likely to have people needing to stop quickly and would want to be able to, especially since some of these are businesses. I mean, sometimes they're friends or people who are dropping something off, but it seems like a real punishment to the other business to say we're going to deliver to people, but boy, if you go into these neighborhoods, be really careful because you're probably going to get nailed, and there ends up being a price for that. But were you suggesting that we could consider that kind of a policy instead of this grace period or in conjunction with it?
Right. I mean, you could use any combination of these ideas. Now, again, just kind of brainstorming off the top of my head, recognize the reality of these spots, right? What happens is the apartment owners designate visitor spots, right? And the second roommate parks their second vehicle in the visitor spot, right? Because in most of these instances, there's not usually a rule that says residents can't park in the visitor spots. It's that visitors can't park in the resident spots, right? But what happens in my experience in most of these complexes is the residents actually use all the visitor spots. And so if we require them, for instance, to now have delivery spots instead of visitor spots, that's going to be taking away spots from the residents who are then going to go park on the street and contribute to our other parking problems. So, I mean, it's a viable option from a legal perspective, but my first take on it is that I think there are unintended consequences of that particular issue.
Well, I'll just finish by saying I like this idea of a grace period. I don't know if we need the 15 or the 30 as two different kinds make this distinction that Ogden has made, but I think it's reasonable. I think it's unreasonable not to have it, frankly. I think they're just, I don't know how else we can make sure that we're protecting against predatory towing or mitigating the incentive that's already there to act as quickly as possible. I think we need something to be reasonable, and I think 15 minutes feels reasonable to me. Councilor Ellsworth?
I just want to make sure that we have maybe the scope or scale understood. I don't, because what the instances that Brian was bringing up sound like something very specific to an HOA, where there is controlled and managed parking internal to a project, where the towing is probably organized and paid for in some part or contracted with by the HOA. It seems like most of those instances is what Brian's referring to. And I recently lived in an HOA like that, but the delivery drivers didn't park in a stall. They just stopped in front of your house, dropped something off, got back in their vehicle. Like they were parked in the middle of the street. And now I live in a single family detached neighborhood that doesn't have an HOA. The delivery drivers do the same thing. They stop in the middle of the road, they get out and drop something off, like Amazon, for example, and then they get back in the big van and drive away. Are we sure that this is like fit to suit different types of development?
Are you directing that question?
It's just a general
Okay.
question. Like I'm not sure how it fits into every situation right now.
Councilor McKay?
I think we're for sure just talking about apartments, right? We're talking about complexes that don't have a front door to go in front of, or even a city street. The city streets are busy right there. You can't just stay on them like you can a small residential side street. That's my impression. And I for sure think 30 is too long. I think 15 is appropriate. I think you are going to have the issues that Brian mentioned. It is a nuisance when your spot is taken when you come home after a long night. But
Any other comments or questions? So this is for discussion only. So if the council wishes to forward any of these items for adoption into the city code through an ordinance, a motion would be appropriate.
Chair Hanley, maybe
Yes.
before you get to that, this was actually this is a team project where there's actually two presentations. I have one that I was going to give to on some
Please do.
additional issues.
Go ahead.
As most of the counselors will recall, I think everyone will recall that last fall, there was an ordinance passed that changed the maximum towing fees in Provo for patrol tows. Because as you'll probably recall, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, Provo distinguishes between patrol tows and request tows. And patrol tows are only allowed for residential complexes where the tower meets and the property owner meets some certifying requirements that have to be reviewed by the mayor and the mayor's designee. They have to be granted the right to patrol tow. When those ordinances were put in place, there was a maximum dollar fee put in for how much you could charge on a patrol tow. And one of the questions that came up when in last year's ordinance was that flat number of $175 was changed to 80% of what the state allows. And I'll get into that in just a second. But there was some during that discussion of that ordinance, there was a tow company owner that presented to the council and made some statements about Provo's signage requirements not being in keeping with state law, and also made some arguments about needing further adjustments to the fees. And the council at that time said, we want to hear back about those things at a later date. And essentially, this is a presentation that's been put off all year long as other things have taken over the agenda and been higher priority. So I'm here to address those two issues. Will this let me change slides? There we go. Oh, that went too far. Am I doing that? Can you go back to the second slide? This isn't working for me. Okay. So here are the signage requirements for patrol tows. This is a comparison of state code and Provo City Code. And just for brevity, I can go through these bullet point by bullet point if you want, but in a simpler manner, you'll notice that on the right-hand side, where it says Provo City Code, that fees charged is italicized. The reason why that's italicized is because that's the only requirement in Provo City Code that isn't in the state code. So my analysis on a patrol tow situation is that any sign that meets state code would meet Provo City Code, except for the fact that Provo City Code requires them to put the fees charged on the sign, which, if you think about it, is kind of problematic for the tow company now that we've changed to a percentage. Before, it just meant they needed to put $175 on the sign. Now they've got adjusted every time the state adjusts theirs, which happens annually for inflation. So before I give my recommendation, let's go to the next slide, which talks about request tows. The state actually has different requirements for request tows, but again, they're virtually, well, it's not that they're virtually identical, it's that they are much more restrictive than the city code requirements. And any state code sign would meet Provo City Code except for the fees charged. And state code allows them to choose between putting the name and telephone number of the carrier or the name and telephone number of the property owner, where city code requires them to put the name and telephone number of the carrier, which again is maybe problematic because we're actually talking about situations where they don't have a contract and they are calling a particular tower to come pick up the car as a personal call. So after reviewing this and thinking about it my recommendation would actually be that we repeal the city code signage requirements, because I don't think that they actually accomplish very much. The state code requirements are fairly new and much more detailed than they used to be. And given that they are so much more descriptive and exhaustive than the city code requirements. I don't think that the city code requirement is really getting us anything that the state code requirement doesn't already. So even though I don't think they're in conflict and that where our code is not illegal, I do think that it's maybe redundant. And the very few things that aren't redundant about it are potentially problematic. So my recommendation would actually be we just take the signage provisions out of the city code. Any questions about that before I go on to the next item? Could you go to the next slide?
Oh, Mr. Fillmore has a question.
Yes, Mr. Fillmore.
Brian, with respect to our code. With respect to our code, would you simply have a line saying see state code, or would just drop it entirely if people are looking for guidance?
Right. I would just drop it entirely. We can refer to it in case there was a tow company out there that didn't know any better, but the state code provisions are you may not tow unless you have signs that meet these requirements. So I think and tow companies have to be certified by the state. So I think any tow company is going to be aware of those provisions. So I don't even think a cross-reference is necessary, but I'd be happy to include one if that is desired.
Oh, not a big deal. Just curious.
Okay. One other thing I noticed while I was doing this, if you go to the next slide, there's state code act. Oh, sorry, I was skipping this slide. Just kind of by way of exhaustiveness of putting everything out there. There's also this difference that the two talk about where the signs have to be located. But again, I actually prefer the new state code definition that actually, it doesn't define entrance, but it actually talks about the fact that if there's no clearly defined entrance, then the signs have to be every 40 feet along the property line. And city code, it just says within 5 feet of an entrance, unless that's not practical, and then 30 feet from no more than 30 feet from the code. And their definition of an entrance is complicated and may not actually apply to every property. So again, I think for simplicity's sake, I would just take that part out. I would recommend taking that part out as we remove the rest of the signage requirements. Next slide. One of the things that I found as I was looking through this that I actually hadn't realized before is state code distinguishes between 3 different types of tows. So there's patrol tows, which are done by contract. There's request tows that are done by actually calling and saying, please come get this specific car. There's also tows that are allowed to happen just without signage at all. And here is one place where city code does actually conflict with state code. State code says that property owners may remove such a vehicle 24 hours after they've posted a written notice and the notice is described in state code on the vehicle. Provo City Code actually says you can't do it unless the car's been parked there for more than 72 hours, which given the provision of state code, I think we actually can't enforce because it's directly in conflict. So again, that would be something that I would just recommend taking out as we do these other things. And then, so the other thing I wanted to talk about really quickly is fees. So if you can go to the next slide. So on the left-hand side, here are the current state code fees. The tow service itself is $179. Then they can charge $40 to $45 a day for, respectively, for outside versus inside storage for a small vehicle. There's actually other prices if it's a medium duty or heavy duty vehicle instead of a light duty vehicle. $37 for administrative charge, and then they can charge $8.95 for fuel once the average Rocky Mountain daily fuel price reaches $3.25 a gallon, and then 25 cents and then another $8.95 for every 25 cents that the gas price goes up above that. Since the current gas price on the index, at least last week when I looked at the daily average, was $3.85, that allows them 2 additional increases. So it's currently $26.85 for fuel that they can charge. So the total for a tow is $283 to $288, depending on whether they have outside or inside storage. And that's regardless of whether it's a request or a patrol tow. So moving over to the right-hand side, in Provo from 2013 to 2021, the limitation was $175 if it was a patrol tow. If it was a request tow, we didn't have a cap. We've now changed that just last year, so it's now 80% of the state fee, which would be currently $226 approximately. So that's where we're at right now, but it would go up every year as the state adjusts, or go down as fuel costs go down and the surcharge goes away. Councilor Whipple, did you have a question about that?
I do. We've gotten emails from people who've been towed, and they have mentioned additional fees that they were charged, like after hours fees, or the one that was supposedly in a handicap spot, but it was not a legally designated handicap spot. So what are the other additional fees that might be tacked on, and are those extra legal?
I believe so, especially under the way that our city code is written, especially for a patrol tow. I haven't seen anything in the after hours. The after hours fee, I suppose, is a little bit of a gray area, because what they're basically saying is if you come pick up your car tomorrow when our office is open, you don't have to pay anything extra. But if you want it right now and we have to send somebody to the office to open it to give you your car, then you have to pay us an extra fee. I don't think that's permitted, but I don't know that it's explicitly prohibited in state code. We could look at, that's something we could definitely look at for city code. In fact, I'm quite confident that we had, unless we took it out, and I don't think we did, a provision in city code that requires them to be available to turn over a vehicle within 1 hour from being called about the vehicle. So we may just need to clarify that by adding something that says at no cost to the car owner. And the handicap space, I don't know why that would qualify for any kind of additional fees. So it might, if it was actually a legal handicap space, it might subject somebody to a citation from the police, but shouldn't have anything to do with the towing. So the other issue that came up was booting. And I think this was particularly where the tow company owner that spoke to us last year was really asking for some relief. So the state rule right now is $75 for a boot for the first 24-hour period, then $25 for every additional 24-hour period up to $150 maximum. City code says, regardless of whether you are, whether it's a patrol boot or a requested boot, you can't charge more than 50% of the maximum tow service rate, which, as you'll see in the other column, is $179. So at Provo, for a boot, regardless of circumstances, you're limited to $89.50 maximum, regardless of how many days it is. Additionally, if it happens to be a patrol boot instead of a requested boot, from 2013 to 2021, it was $60. It's now currently 80% of the state maximum, which, if you're quick with math, 80% of $75 is $60. So it didn't actually change when we changed it from a flat fee to the 80%, but it has the potential to change if the state raises their maximums. So I don't have any specific recommendations or even comments on that. There was just a request from the council several months ago to revisit the fee issue. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but it's just up to the council whether, with that information in front of them, there's any desire to do anything about fees.
Councilor McKay?
So in reading it, I didn't understand that all those extra fees were included in the towing. So I thought that our towing was like around 143, and I was concerned about that. But you are saying that everyone knows that all these extra fees are what our 80% of state fee includes.
Well, I will admit, as I was a little bit perturbed when I looked at our code, because I think it's probably my own error, but I think I made a mistake when we drafted our ordinance last year, because it says 80% of the fee allowed by a specific state regulation. And that regulation doesn't actually talk about all of the fees that are on the left-hand side. But at the same time, I believe that was the intent. I'm sure that that was what we were doing before because that line about the specific regulation wasn't in there before. And if we're currently capped at 80% of 179, that means our cap is lower now than it was before, which I don't believe to have been the intent.
I just don't know if that's known. Like, I think we should probably explain that better because I immediately thought it was like 140, like, I don't know, 142 or something.
Right. So I did have, I hadn't mentioned this, but I did have notes from preparing the presentation that assuming the council was okay with the signage requirements, when I was preparing the ordinance to fix the signage requirements, I was going to go into the section about the 80% and clarify what it meant.
That'd be great.
So. Any other?
So right now, what you need from us on these three items, the grace period issue, code cleanup about signs and fees, you're just looking for a decision from us about which, if or all of these three, we would like to revisit with specific recommendations.
And to maybe make the discussion a little bit easier for you, since it's actually my recommendation to take the signage requirements out, and I saw a lot of nodding heads, I probably don't necessarily need discussion about that unless the council doesn't want to do that. My plan would be to go back and prepare an ordinance that actually at least met those recommendations, because that's what I'm recommending, and bring that back to you unless I'm told otherwise. But if you want anything else in it besides the clarification of the 80% and the removal of the signage requirements, then we would need guidance about anything about delivery vehicles, grace periods, fee changes, anything that the council wants. We would be looking for instructions for those.
So let's just try to quickly clarify then. Any opposition to a cleanup on the signs? So I think that's an easy one. What are the council feelings about coming back with any recommendations for grace period or fees? Mr. Fillmore.
I like the idea of a grace period, 15 minutes. I also like the idea of delivery vehicles being self-identifying. So that people know if it's a DoorDash or something, as opposed to just somebody usurping a tenant's parking spot. As far as the 80% thing, is that I assume that the rationale for that in the past disincentivize towing, right? Do we lay the percentage against the max?
I would characterize it probably in two ways. One, I think there was, when the administration, this was Mayor Curtis, when these were originally proposed and presented to the council, there was definitely, I believe, an intent to incentivize request tows over patrol tows, because there was a definite feeling that if the property owner is actually calling the tow company, that means that the property owner is exercising their property rights and they want the tow to happen. There was a definite suspicion that sometimes patrol tows happen in circumstances when the property owner wouldn't even want the tow to happen. It's just happening because they've authorized a tow company to take care of it for them, and the tow company wants to grab everyone that they can. And so there was a desire to disincentivize those a little bit, I believe. And then I think to just limit the amount of kind of address that tension between the two by limiting the amount of pain on the owner and gain by the tow company in that particular situation.
That makes sense.
I would say one of the things that Mark and I discussed that didn't come up, but just so you know, is one of the things we looked at, and they're the only city I know of that does this, but Ogden actually prohibits patrol tows. That's one of the reasons why they talk about these controlled and uncontrolled lots, is because patrol tows aren't even allowed. Let me back up. It's not why they distinguish between controlled and uncontrolled. It's why they talk about, it's one of the ways they implement the grace period, because the observation, the 15 to 30 minute observation actually has to be what triggers the call to come tow the vehicle. So they're the only city that I know of that does that. I think that, I mentioned to Mark that I was a little bit hesitant to bring that up because I think there could definitely be some strong appeal to that idea. I worry a little bit about the state legislature's reaction to going that far, but apparently that's what Ogden is doing, and that's something that you could consider. But
Other instructions for Mark and Brian on this? Yes, Counselor Whipple.
So to add to what Councilor Fillmore said, when we're looking at a grace period for temporary ones, I'm curious about whether we would want that grace period extended to any vehicle, not just marked delivery ones, you know, your neighbor who's coming by to drop off something for you. I think that's an appropriate use of that kind of space. But I also want to be sensitive to the difficulty that setting this up can create for enforcement. It seems like you would have to have your little tow truck guy sitting out there with the timer instead of just knowing that he can go and enter the lot because that vehicle is parked impermissibly. And so I'd like to know if this actually would be something that's feasible or if it would really just wreck the entire system.
Could I make a comment about that? I know that the current practice by one of the business owners in city is actually they have body cameras and they have timers. Because they know even with our current law, they could be accused of predatory behavior. And so when a ticket is issued, it'll have the time, what is it? The time of observation and then the time of implementation or something.
Yeah,
so I think it's already happened. I don't think it would.
We require, at least for patrol tows, part of our patrol tow requirements are that you have to either through video or photographic evidence document the violation that you were towing for. Instead of just taking it on the word of the tow truck driver that the tire was over the line, you actually have to have photographs of that. And those have to be date and time stamped. So I think implementation is actually not that hard because you could, whatever the grace period is, you could just say, instead of 15 minutes after observation, for instance, you could say 15 minutes after documentation. And so then they've got a date, time stamped photograph or video that says when they observed it and they can't connect for 15 minutes later. And I guess the one thing to think about, if the only thing that we're really looking to protect is delivery and we're talking about DoorDash and pizza and stuff, maybe 5 minutes is enough as opposed to 15 minutes, right? If we're really only trying to get people that are pulling up to the curb and running something up to the door. But to your point about delivery versus others, I know that one of Mayor Curtis's horror stories from the stack of emails that he had when we looked at this back in 2013 was a bishop who was bringing soup to a sick congregant and got towed while he was taking the soup to the door. So there's definitely
it sounds like
multiple
it
scenarios.
sounds like a myth or proverbial story, but my wife got booted for bringing cookies to our daughter. So yeah, it can happen within 6 minutes.
Yeah.
I would just voice my endorsement of the idea of coming back to us with a recommendation on a grace period. Is there anyone who's opposed to that at this point? So that looks like another. So, and as far as my feelings on the fees, I don't know how everyone else feels, but I heard a couple of things like extra hour fees or other added fees that shouldn't be in there, that if we need to explicitly prohibit, I'd like to see that happen so that we don't end up with exorbitant and unnecessary costs. But that's about all I can think of. I don't know.
But aren't we providing the owner of the car with an option to pick up his car at night if he's willing to pay an extra $25? For a lot of people, they'd be happy to pay $25, not have to wait the next day to get there. I mean, it's a service,
Well, I guess maybe it's a matter of what the fee is, or if it's reasonable, or if it's.
Well, I think from my perspective, I think city code actually, I mean, the argument is that it's an inconvenience to them to send somebody down to the yard to release the vehicle. the flip side to that is I think our city code already requires them to be available to do that. So I'm not sure that, I think there's an argument to be made that they shouldn't be able to charge for it at all because it's already, it's a cost of doing business in Provo City that's already in our code. But that's a policy decision that could go either way.
So do you have enough direction at this point, or is there?
I think so. Unless there's some discussion about if there's, is 15 minutes kind of the general consensus for the grace period? Or I'll just put 15 minutes in, it can be debated when I bring it back to you.
Yeah, maybe we'll just
use that as the starting point. Okay. I think I've got enough to bring you something back then.
Okay. So thank you so much, Brian. Thanks, Mark. All right. We have one more item before of our work session today, and that's an ordinance amending Provo City Code Section 4.01.010 regarding the process for making appointments to the Civil Service Commission to align with state code. You thought you were done. And Mayor Kafusi has joined us, and I didn't even mention that you had also joined us, Mr. Jones and Mr. Parker, Chief Administrative. Have all of you here.
Well, it definitely probably wasn't worth walking over there and then walking back for this, because this is like a 30-second presentation, if that. As you already know from previous conversations, state code says that civil service commissioners are to be appointed by the council. We actually have a provision of city code, and I don't know the history of this. I'm not sure if the state code changed or if the city code was passed without consulting the state code, just because of the fact that this is how it normally is. But the city code says civil service commissioners are appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of the council. Obviously, we need to fix that since they're in conflict. So all this does is change the city code to be in compliance with state code and put that back over to the councilors. So I guess while I have a second, since we're not behind time, I would mention one other thing just to maybe get council feedback about it. We've encountered some problems with the state code about the Civil Service Commission appointments, specifically the fact that it doesn't say anything about appointing alternates or what to do if a commissioner can't serve in an appeal hearing or during some of their duties. So it's been my intent to reach out to one of our local representatives and actually ask them to run a state bill to clarify and give us some additional powers regarding civil service commissioners, regarding recusals and appointments and some things like that. Actually, at the same time that I also talked to them about this issue we've had about the water board before, about the fact that this issue of being mandated to appoint the applicants that we encountered before. In reviewing the code, I had two thoughts of additional things that we might ask them to do that I'd welcome any feedback on. One of them is that the state code actually requires no more than 2 of the 3 civil service commissioners to be of the same political party. From my perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense, given that this is an entity that exists at the local level where we have nonpartisan elections. So my take would be, I think it might make sense to actually ask, while we're asking for other changes to this code section, the state code section, to ask them to remove that requirement and have this be a nonpartisan appointment, like all of the rest of our city level appointments are. I also think that it might make some sense to ask them to change the state code to reflect what our current city code says right now, of actually making it a mayoral appointment with council advice and consent, just because that is how most city level appointments work. I don't have necessarily an opinion on that, but I'd welcome any feedback about whether the council would like either of those requests to be made.
No more.
I'd be fully supportive of the recommendations you're making. Good sense.
Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we're running into is that we need someone to recuse themselves because they were formerly an employee of the city. Is that right?
Right.
And maybe going forward, we shouldn't be appointing people who were former employees, because they would naturally be entangled in some way with these kinds of personnel issues, which is, my understanding, the primary objective of having the Civil Service Commission.
Well, they actually have a couple of primary duties. Hearing appeals is actually probably their secondary function. Primarily, they actually work with promotions and reviewing lists for promotions and testing and some other things. They actually don't hear very many appeals, and I think that's why it was originally thought that the former employee would be a good idea because of their knowledge. But it has caused some problems, and that's been something that the administration has certainly discussed. And if it were to change so that the administration were the one appointing, I think they would definitely take that into consideration in the future.
Okay, even if their primary duty or their first duty was to make recommendations on promotions or something like that, they're still entangled if they were a former employee. Like they're entangled because of their previous employment. So I think there's some hiccups there that should be evaluated. And then in our form of government, where the mayor is the executive and 99% of employees report through some path to the mayor, maybe it does make sense to have a separation and have that appointment come from the legislative branch, who's not as consistently or as directly tied to those employees.
I'm nodding my head. I'm the attorney that should know. For the record, I have to talk out loud. So I think that makes sense. That's definitely a valid policy consideration. And so again, I don't have strong feelings either way. It was more kind of my idea in bringing it to the council was, it seems like this has kind of been a burden lately. And if you want a burden off your plates, I'd be happy to recommend taking it off your plates. But there are certainly policy considerations for leaving it where it is. I don't have a recommendation or a strong feeling about it either way. I do think the political party one doesn't make any sense, but the other thing is up in the air for me.
Mr. Shipley. Yeah, I'm trying to think why, what the intent would have been on the political party. And I guess even though we are nonpartisan, I guess I can see that becoming an issue. I wouldn't want it to be an issue. I would think that it wouldn't be, but I guess I could think up or dream up some situation where you have, 3 people in a party that want somebody promoted because of their political, party, or to align, themselves with someone from a promotional standpoint or from a disciplinary standpoint, an appeal standpoint because of political party. So I can't think of what other intent there would have been, but I guess I kind of think there might be a reason for having some diversity on a group like that. And even though political party might not ever come up in 10 or 20 years, it may at some point. And I guess trying to avoid that makes sense in my mind.
Okay.
Councilor McKay.
I thought kind of the same thing as Councilor Shipley. The diversity factor and especially where this comes to firing and stuff, I can see that it could be relevant.
Okay.
So, this is coming back to us tonight. So if we have any.
Yeah, the only thing that's coming back to you tonight is just passing the city ordinance that changes it from the mayor to the city council so that it matches state code.
Okay.
So we're not doing anything tonight except for a code cleanup. Then I'm going to contact one of the representatives and make some asks. But based on the feedback that I've got right now, I'll probably, just because there's some division of opinion, I'll probably just limit the asks to what I think actually needs to happen regarding recusal and alternates. And probably as far as I would go is maybe mention to the representative that there were discussion of those 2 issues. And if he wants to discuss it at the state legislature level, then they can talk about it. And, but I won't express that the Provo Council has an opinion on either of those things.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. We have arrived at the conclusion of our agenda. A closed session has been requested. Mr. Jones, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, there has been a closed session requested. There's an item on the agenda to discuss the character and competence of an individual. And so it'd be appropriate to close the meeting at this time.
Okay, I'll look for a motion to close the meeting. Counselor Ellsworth. There a second?
I'll second that. Or
Counselor Shipley.
from a timing standpoint, are we okay to move into that right now?
Well,
instead of
I was
waiting?
going to recommend that we just take a little bit of a break. There's ice cream down the hall and convene at 4:15. Does that sound all right to everybody? That's what time we had indicated we would start our closed session, so 4:15. Okay, so we've got a second from Mr. Shipley. I'll call for a vote. Chair Handley, that is me. I will say yes. Vice Chair McKay,
Yes.
Counselor Whipple,
Yes.
Counselor Ellsworth,
Yes.
Counselor Shipley,
Yes.
Counselor Hoban,
Yes.
Counselor Fillmore.
Yes, sir.
All right, we will convene at 4:15 in the pre-function area for the closed meeting. Thanks so much.
Record